Alrighty, thank you all for tuning in to watch this recorded webinar. Our topic today is estimating isn't easy, but it should be a piece of cake. The analogy cake stands for complete, accurate, knowledge-based, and effective. And in today's session, we'll dive into each of these letters more in depth and show you how this applies when using Trimble's mechanical estimating software. My name is Caprice Van Den Essem. I am the host for today's session on the product marketing team at Trimble, specializing in mechanical estimating. For reference, this webinar is recorded and it'll be shared out in the next few days. But if you've missed that timeline, you're also able to find it under the webinars tab of the Trimble community portal. You can also visit www.trimbleenterprisecommunity.com to access this, or if you happen to be watching live, or looking back on it, you can also use your phone and scan that QR code below to pull it up right away. Next, I'll pass it to Kip, who's our presenter today, to introduce himself.
Well, thanks, Caprice. For those of you that are watching this recording, thank you for taking your time to spend the day with us. We'll hopefully spend at least about 30 minutes talking about estimating not being easy, but it should be a piece of cake. My name's Kip Ivey. I'm a senior product specialist here at Trimble. I've been in this industry for 40 plus years, with over 25 of it focusing in the world of construction technology. I started working with this software even as an end user back in the days when it was just bootable floppy. Obviously, we've come much further than that. And we're going to talk today mainly around the concept of estimating, not necessarily related to a particular product, but the concept of estimating. But we will dive into a product, try to talk about or hammer home some ideas around the idea that, estimating should be a piece of cake. So what do we mean by cake? Interesting enough, when, Caprice and I discussed this and we were trying to make a determination of, what kind of content do we want to put out there? My original idea was to talk about estimating, how it's not one of the really cool tools anymore in the industry. And, it's not augmented reality or virtual reality. It's not 3D scanning or artificial intelligence, at least not today. But when I started thinking about it, I realized that estimating is such an integral part of our industry. Whether you're working in the MEP space, whether you're working in the GC, it doesn't matter what segment of construction you're working in. Estimating is where everything starts, and it's also potentially where everything ends. Then unless you have a great estimate, we have nothing to draw. Unless you have a great estimate, we have nothing to scan. Unless you have a great estimate, AI isn't going to help. So when looking at the basic components of estimating, I came up with this idea that, well, cake, it's really a piece of cake. Now, I've estimated myself for years, learned from probably, in my opinion, the greatest estimator in the world, my father. And so cake, what it stands for is complete, right? Does the solution that I'm using, does the software I can have contain the information that I need to be successful in whatever segment of the construction industry I'm working in today? We're going to focus heavily on the MEP space because that's my world. But certainly this analogy holds for no matter what segment of the construction you're working in. Accuracy. Does it have appropriate specifications? Can I create appropriate specifications? Does it have industry standard pricing that not only I can use out of the box potentially, or even adjust to meet my needs, right? Can I input my own labor rate, my own blended rate, my own burden rate? Is it easily functional in relationship to breaking up drawings and scaling the information? Do I have the ability to put my knowledge into the system? Look, estimating is a knowledge-based function. There's this concept of knowledge and wisdom, right? And the whole idea of knowledge-based is being able to take that information and place it into an application that I can create some semblance of consistency, but I also understand the nuances that exist in the world of estimating, and understanding that can I make adjustments based upon certain circumstances. And the last we're going to discuss is effective. Can I adjust particular details? Can I break a job out even after it's been estimated? Um, can I adjust for schedules and that kind of function? Those things that are job specific. So we're going to kind of dive into that. Hopefully, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about how really putting a good estimate is also kind of like baking a cake, right? Because when you bake a cake, the first thing you have to have is you have to have the appropriate ingredients. You have to have the right flour and butter and sugar and all those kind of things. And in those measurements, all those particular parts, pieces, and components that go into the making of a cake need to be accurately measured. They need to be of quality, right? It's the old phrase, garbage in, garbage out, right? Well, in the estimating world too, the same thing exists. If I don't understand the project requirements, if I don't understand the true specification of a project of how it's going to go together, and I don't have the appropriate resources or even historical information or any of that other kind of like something as simple as, do I have the appropriate things in my database? Do I have copper pipe? Do I have carbon steel? Do I have stainless steel? Am I using MCA labor rates or am I using the PACC labor rates? Am I using the SMACNA labor rates? Do I have that information in the estimating software that's easily accessible and are the appropriate agreements? In other words, is my pricing accurate based upon today's market? Knowing that the world that we live in right now, I could bid a job, and I've had this happen to me in the past where I bid a job on let's say January 1, and I don't get the contract till June. Now, you think about the current climate we're in today, the price differential between January and June could be dramatically different. Right? Do I have the ability to adjust those ingredients so I end up with a better estimate of the back end? Right. So, because without the right ingredients, without the appropriate information to provide the base knowledge in your estimate, you're going to end up with a cake that just kind of goes, right? But the same thing exists in the estimating. You're going to end up with an estimate that doesn't even look like it should, right? A prime example is my when my when I was first married, my wife came to me when she had this tray, and on that tray were some some baked items. And I looked at her, I said, "Honey, you just made cookies. Thank you." And she started crying and she said, "No, those are my biscuits." Well, they didn't rise because whatever the cake she used or the yeast she used wasn't measured appropriately. It doesn't really matter why. We like to think we have a pretty good reason why, but we ended up with something that didn't look like a biscuit and probably could have killed somebody if I would have thrown it. So that's what I mean by do you have the right ingredients, right? Now, accuracy. When you're baking a cake, everything needs to be at the appropriate level of component, right? And do I have the correct amount of flour? Do I have the correct amount of eggs and milk and butter and oil and everything else that goes into making of that cake, right? That's what makes that cake to rise. Now, during as a seasoned baker, you realize that I could just add a little pinch of salt. I could add a little additional cinnamon, that kind of thing. I can spice up that cake to meet my taste and my taste buds. In estimating, the same thing exists, right? There are certain aspects that as you're going through that, even though you have the appropriate the appropriate pipe valves and fittings, you have the appropriate quantities, counts, right? In the world of estimating, there's only three ways to estimate anything: by length, by count, and how big. As long as I have the appropriate quantitative information, then I need to, maybe make some adjustments knowing what I know based upon my historical information or my industry expertise. Now, I know we're already tweaking into that knowledge function because this is a very blended function, just like baking a cake. This is not a singular function where, the C, the A, the K, and the E are just these living monoliths of information. No, this is a very blended function. And you need to blend the ingredients together to end up with a great cake. But you also need to blend the appropriate ingredients together to end up with a great estimate. Because, in the world of estimating, we know that I can be as accurate back that very few jobs go in like they're drawn. Very, very few. Drawings that are produced today don't have the same quantity of information that existed when I started way back when you would open up a set of drawings and the waft of ammonia would fill the room. Everything now is done digitally, and so because of that, you need to make sure that whatever you're putting in, that you're allowing for things that potentially aren't on the drawing, right? Using that information to get an accurate estimate. And so even with a great, amazing, fantastic recipe, things change. Ovens get too hot. Um, you read the thing a little bit wrong, right? Things change, right? And you're going to have to adjust. In the estimating world, I have to do that as well. I have to adjust my estimate. I have to understand that whatever tool I'm using gives me the ability to put into it those concepts of uncertainty, those the idea that things aren't exactly what I see to be great, right? You need to be able to adjust for the unexpected. You need to adjust for the unknown, include buffers of information so that you can put your factor on it to make sure that you end up with the most accurate, quantitatively correct estimate you can possibly do.
And we will be providing some tactical tips and best practices for you, just as recommendations for how you can really revolutionize your estimating practice so that you are able to deliver those complete, accurate, knowledge-based, and effective estimates, and ultimately have more success through projects and achieve the ROI you're looking to as well. So stay tuned for the end of our webinar. We'll be walking through some practical tips and tricks as well.
Yeah, and you're right. The goal here is we're gonna walk through this. Just kind of we'll talk about the acronym that we're actively working on right now, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna dive into the software and we're gonna try to show you some nuances of how we can put the information together using some of the tools that I have available to me today. Because like Capri said, when you think about an estimating solution, the ROI for the estimating solution is all about time, productivity, and accuracy. Those are the three components of how an estimating software pays for itself. And we'll cover that as well. So when you think about knowledge, right, we already talked about adjusting when necessary, right? But more importantly, just like cake recipes are handed down across generationally, handed down across families. And matter of fact, my wife for the last number of weeks actually has been going through boxes and boxes of information and finding um, recipes from her grandmother and her mother who recently passed away, and my mother who had passed away. And you can tell whose recipes they are by the handwriting, and so forth. But she's going through these recipes, and for her, especially there, it's very in a very emotional thing, right? Because those recipes were handed down throughout the generations, and in the world of construction, the same thing exists with knowledge. The great thing about a computerized estimating software is I think it gives you the ability to create a kind of mentor relationship with some younger estimators and to give you the ability to standardize that information to impart the knowledge of a gray-haired dude like me into the software so that the next generation can come forward, grab that piece of software and use it effectively, knowing that the effective result is going to be what we need. So Every baker knows how to tweak a recipe to end up with the perfect cake. Every estimator that works for a particular organization understands how that organization, how do they estimate? Are they doing top down or bottom up, right? Are they looking at historical metrics, right? How are they? Everybody does it a little bit different. I talk with these estimating organizations all the time, and I can honestly say it's a it's very, very few do it exactly the same way, even if they're using the same software. Um, because those organizations know how their company is structured. Because when you put an estimate on the street today, I think every contractor is out there knowing that they are betting on the ingenuity, productivity, and culture that they've created within their organization to make them successful on a project because everybody else is bidding the exact same set of drawings. So while structure is key, right? That flexibility of knowledge and everything, that's what makes the difference between putting together a great estimate or simply just doing a quote, right? So what do I mean by effective, right? It could be effective, could be effectual. It basically means, do I end up with the intended result, right? I mean, we've all been to celebrations where you walk in and you see this cake. You say, well, it's a wedding cake or a birthday cake or whatever, a retirement cake, right? Whatever the case may be, you walk in and you go, wow, that's a cool cake. That's a great cake, right? And people have pictures of cakes, and because it gave the intended result, that factor, that shock and awe kind of function, right? But with an estimate, if I have the appropriate information that I can pass to my project managers, that I can pass off to my accounting team, that I can pass off to my VDC team, right? If I have that appropriate information, I've already got part of the effect that I wanted. I've given them everything that I did to get the job that helped to do their job better. And you think about this web of information. We've all heard the phrase data being the new oil, right? But unlike crude oil, I can't simply just, if this bottle of soda was a bottle of oil, I couldn't take this out to my car, pour it in my car, and drive up to the store. Until it's refined, it's just oil. And the data is the same way. And estimating is the same way. Until I take that information and refine it in such a way, it's just a bunch of data. And so these tools, right? The tools that we have before us today allow us to refine that data across multiple stakeholders. You think about internally within the world of Trimble here. We're a very large organization with all kinds of applications that tie into each other and talk to each other, allow us to refine the estimating data to get the potential effect on my organization and my project that I possibly can achieve. So, a well-crafted estimate is going to be able to give you that information. And starting, hopefully one of the things you can do with computerized estimating is help you craft that estimate to provide that information forward, right? And then as time goes along, as that baker continues to bake, we've all got, there's a great bakery here where in the local town that I live. They've been open now going on 80 plus years. I doubt they're still making a donut today like they made the same donut 80 years ago. They've refined that recipe over time based upon the product and based upon what's available and based upon what the customer wanted. And the same thing exists in estimating. As your organization begins to mature, as your organization begins to grow, your estimating is going to be able to be refined as well. If you're estimating manually today, I would have to believe that you're looking at some type of computerized estimating tomorrow. I gave a speech last year in a room of about 250 contractors. And one of the questions I asked was, who's using computerized estimating? Now, we can have a conversation around what does computerized estimating mean, right? To some, that could be just a spreadsheet. To others, it's an actual program, an application, like we're going to look at here in just a minute. But in the room, 91% were using some type of computerized estimating. That was actually kind of shocking to me. I thought it'd been 100% this day and age. But then I asked a question and I said, but how many of you are using that same estimating tool to give you a final number that you send on a contract and send it out the door? That went from 91% down to about 10%, which, once again, wasn't really shocking to me because we're all creatures of habit, right? We all have our little spreadsheets we love to have and that thing. So I left that room with a question. I said, I find it interesting that many of you are using computerized estimating, but I have to ask you this question. Why do you trust a piece of software to provide you pounds, counts, quantities, price, and labor, but don't trust it to put a final number? And I believe that all starts with belief, education, implementation, and trust. And so as you go through these things, remember, estimating is an integral part of everything we do. It is not, right? It's not easy. Not everybody can put an estimate together, right? But hopefully you understand that estimating in today's world can be a piece of cake. So with that, let's talk a little bit. Let's open up a piece of software here. I'm going to go ahead and escape out of this. Now, I'm in Autobid Mechanical. We have multiple applications within the Trimble world. Within the MEP space, we have Autobid Mechanical, Autobid Sheet Metal, we have Estimation Desktop. And depending on where you fit within the industry, those applications will work, we will work with you to determine the appropriate application. Now, first thing we talked about was complete. Does it have the information I need to be successful? So what you're looking at today, I have not customized this software in any way, shape, or form. As a salesman, I personally believe that's the best way to show it is out of the box. We should trust what we show out of the box. So what I'm showing you today is out of the box, fresh install, and this can be hosted on premise. In other words, you can host it on your local hard drive like I am today, or you can put it in the cloud, and then you don't have to host it by yourself anymore, and you can really estimate from anywhere in the world, right? But what do I mean by complete? First thing, probably the most basic component in the world of mechanical estimating is, do I have the appropriate pipe, valves, and fittings? Do I have the appropriate material to be successful? So I'm simply going to go into what's called project specs, and I'm going to hit what's called specification schedules. Now this is going to take me out to our spec schedule here. And over here on the left are all the various specifications that are installed out of the box. There's probably, I'm going to say, a couple hundred at least. Specification, type L by butt weld, cast iron husky, so forth and so on. And over here are all the various materials. And there's another way to get there as well, but we have probably in the database today well over 50 to right around 50,000 pipe, valves, and fittings items in the database today as it ships out of the box. Now, is this going to be every specification in the world that could possibly exist? No. But we give you the ability to grab any of these, to grab any of these specifications and tweak them for your own organization. For example, if I grab, this one right here, and I'm just grabbing we're saying, okay, up through 2 inches, right? They're going to CW tube, and down here, we're going to go to ERW, right? I'm going to go with, going to use lightweight clevis hangers with standard weight clevis hangers, and it's going to have threaded valves on the smaller bore stuff, and we're going to go to flanged valves on the bigger bore stuff. If you look at the cast iron no hub spec, right? 1.5 inches down is copper DWV. Anything larger than that is going to be cast iron no hub. This information, once again, is out of the box. And you can tweak these. I can certainly click on any of these specifications. I can duplicate it and then edit it and create my own spec for my own organization based again, once again, based upon your knowledge. Because like I said, this is a very integrated platform. If we get out of the specifications and you start thinking about, well, what else do I need, right? Obviously, we have labor is a huge factor. So out of the box, your labor, you could have multiple labor books. Those labor books, for example, could be PACC. We have what we call our standard labor base, our labor tables, as well as you can bring in the MCAA labor tables, and even now with the new database, you can bring in the MCAA WAM labor method. Obviously, you have to have access to the MCAA labor rate for us to give you that information. You have to have access to the PHCC labor book for us to give you that information. But these labor books can be built for you into the city, and you can create as many labor tables as you want so that you can adjust them, once again, based upon your knowledge. But out of the box, we're giving you the right ingredients. And from there, you're going to tweak those ingredients for your organization and how you're going to use the software. Now, accuracy. I think the easiest way to talk about accuracy is hangers. So I'm going to go into takeoff here, and I'm going to show you something. All right, let's go to a different job. Helps if you do the right things, right, Kip? Let's go to a recent project. Let's go to a project that's got a little more information on it. All right. I'm going to zoom in on this drawing here. Maybe. Everything is off my screens here. There we go. All right, so in this particular drawing, we've got pipe valves and fittings, and it will not let me zoom. There it goes. I guess the graphics need to get caught up with this, Caprice. So here we're sitting here, and I'm looking at pipe valves and fittings. So I can look at this particular system and I can simply touch on that, and it tells me, for example, that is heating hot water supply, copper by butt weld, 2 inches down is copper, everything else is carbon steel butt welded pipe. I know that it's on the 3rd floor. I know what drawing it's on. I'm creating accurate information. I'm automatically creating joints, and I'm also automatically creating hangers. Because you'll notice down here it says HJI. It means I'm creating hangers, I'm creating joints, and this pipe is insulated. So you're going to get your saddle shields that go along with your hanger components. But unlike some, when you start thinking about hangers, many of us that have estimated manually in the past, we take lineal footages of ductwork or lineal footages of pipe, and we say our nominal spacing is going to be 8 feet. And we simply say, oh, I've got 240 feet of ductwork or 240 feet of pipe, and I divide by 8 feet, and I'm going to have 30 hangers. Now, that may be good enough if you're going to do a quote, but if I'm going to do an estimate, I need to understand changes in direction. I need to understand fitting placement. I need to understand, is that pipe vertical or horizontal? I need to understand the length of the hanger. In our estimating world, I will give you those extra hangers at the change in direction, knowing that I have to have a hanger on both sides of a fitting. I'm going to turn off hangers in the vertical, turn the hangers back on at the top as I rise, let's say. And if I say that it's a 10-foot structure and I'm hanging pipe at Oh, let's go, let's say 15-foot structure and a hanging pipe at 8 feet. So I'm going to generate a 7-foot hanger. And now all of a sudden I go vertically, which is what this X stands for. I'm going to say I go vertically, and now instead of hanging that pipe at 8 feet, I'm now hanging at 10 feet. And hanger is going to go from 7 feet to 5 until I go back down. Because we're going to generate an accurate hanger count. We're going to generate an accurate bill of materials based upon what's actually occurring in the field and not just some arbitrary number. Now, if I needed to adjust something, we were talking before about, I know, for example, this is heating hot water and it's insulated. Well, what if they came out and they said, and I took it all off and I said, shouldn't have been insulated. Should have just been bare pipe. So at that point, you got this little thing, and we start talking about how I can apply my knowledge into the software. How can I make adjustments, right? This box and feature is one of those tools. So if I hit this box and feature and I can drag a box around it, and it's going to ask me, all right, what do you want to do with everything that's contained within that box? Now, what I'm showing you mechanically is exactly how the sheet metal works. So whether you're working on the wet side of the industry or the dry side of the industry, it does not matter. This feature is ubiquitous across both applications. So I can zoom in on an area, I can delete that pipe, I can create an assembly of that pipe. So now we're starting talking about, if you remember, we started talking about making sure I have the right ingredients. Do I have the right historical information? Anybody that's worked in the mechanical industry knows that when you put in one heat pump, you probably put in 100. So why not create an assembly of a heat pump? Or, once again, if you know your job, and I look at my plans and specs, I'm constantly, as an estimator, looking for common areas. I'm looking for commonality because I want to increase my efficiency as an estimator the most I possibly can. So by zooming in on something, I could create an assembly of an entire floor. Let's say if I had common floors across a high-rise structure, or I could create an assembly of that heat pump, or I could create an assembly of that air handling unit, and I can save those assemblies for future use. Now we're shipping you probably close to 100 assemblies already predefined, but you can create them on the fly. You can create them to keep for future reference, for the historical information, that historical metric. Once again, so that information can be passed down across generations. That knowledge can be passed down generations, just like recipes are passed down from generation to generation. If I can create an assembly of an area, of a bathroom, I can have assemblies in my assemblies. In this instance, we knew that we screwed up and we shouldn't have insulated it. So if I simply hit change, I can make this an alternate bid. I could rezone this job. Now I already got the job. Now I got to come back and they want me to break the job out by area, but I didn't take it off that way. So now I can come back and I can rezone it. I can assign it to a piece of equipment. I can change systems. I can change the specification. I took it off at welded pipe. It should have been grooved. Maybe I want to do what's called, and we'll cover that in a minute. But what if I want to change my hanger spacing in that location? Or in this instance, I simply just want to change the insulation from heating hot water, chilled water to none. The minute I do that and I recalculate this job, everything around my hanger components, my saddle shields will drop because I don't need them anymore. Right? I don't need the shields for the insulation. So all that happens for you automatically, and it gives you the ability to impart your knowledge of how your company goes together and the appropriate specifications into the drawing, either as you're estimating it or as you come back after the fact. Now, I talked briefly about, I said, hey, I took it off a welded pipe and it should have been grooved. We have a function called SIP details. If you're familiar with MCAA, they have a thing that's called short interval planning. It allows us to very, very quickly simply say, create a profile, welded versus grooved, and then we will calculate in the background for you automatically and show you the cost and labor difference if I go welded or if I go grooved. It gives you an an amazing tool for doing that value engineering on the fly, or even coming back after the fact. That's the old saying, the low guy probably didn't want the job, or really, really needs the job. The high guy probably really didn't want it, but the guy in the middle probably knows exactly he's probably got the right number, right? So once you get that job, right, or God forbid you get it, and you're free asking yourself, what did I miss? Which every estimator does. Um, I believe there's two types of estimators in this world: those that got a job because they did something wrong, wrong scale, wrong spec, missed riser pipe, riser duct, and those that don't admit it. So this gives you the ability to adjust that information to make up for your own mistakes. And it's a very powerful tool. And really, be honest, we're the only estimating in the industry that has it. So all that information, comes up to, well, am I getting the right effect? Now I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to jump into autobid sheet metal. And you'll notice that autobid sheet metal looks just like autobid mechanical. Got the same color scheme, so forth and so on. But does it have the right effect? So if I look at this particular project, now this is obviously a sheet metal drawing, not a mechanical drawing. One of the great effects of the sheet metal world is many of us we pretty much are the only trade in the industry that makes everything we install. We take raw materials, we take 2D flat sheets of metal and we turn them into 3D objects. And one of the great effects of an estimate is not only do I have to have the right pricing, like in the mechanical space, we have an application called Tracer, where you can send that information out to ensure you're getting the most accurate information you could possibly get in relationship to your pipe valves and pricing today. We have a national agreement with Ferguson, so you can send that information out to Ferguson. Ferguson will price that project for you and send it back. So you have the most accurate, up-to-date pricing you could possibly have today. In this instance, am I making the ductwork appropriately? Am I getting the appropriate seams? Is it large Pittsburgh, small Pittsburgh? Is it snap lock? Am I getting on medium pressure? Am I getting my ductmate, my ductmate, or my TDC, or my TDF? Is it finishing at 60 inches, 56 or 56 and a quarter? Right? Am I getting trapeze hangers versus hanger strap if I'm going to medium pressure? Am I getting the interstitial supports, on the wider iron, especially in medium pressure world? All that happens for you automatically, and we're giving you that information. But in the sheet metal world, what most of us really like to do is for the holy grail has always been, I want to fabricate this as fast as I possibly can. Now I understand that not every project goes in like it's drawn, but sometimes it's easier to edit than it is to create new. So I'm going to export out of this, and I'm going to go right up here, and I'm going to go File, Export, and I'm going to say Export to Trimble Fab Shop. Now, Fab Shop is one of our tools that allows us to basically fabricate. We're the OEM software for Ingle coil lines, plasma coil and plasma tables, and lock former coil lines and lock former plasma tables. So if you have one of those already, you already have our fab. So I'm just going to create over here, and I'm just going to export this, and I want to export all this ductwork, and I simply say next. And it's working. All right, and I think we're done. Maybe. We're still thinking. So Caprice, while it's thinking, you have anything you want to add?
I want to add, yes, I know you've kind of been jumping back and forth between autobid, mechanical, sheet metal, and whatnot, but also you mentioned estimation desktop, and no matter
Mm-hmm.
no matter if you currently use any of our software, if you're interested in learning more about it, We hold regular webinars and we are always open to jumping in on specific topics. If you are really encouraged to dive in further into anything that KIP has displayed so far, we're always happy to do a deep dive session on any of the topics covered. Or if there's new features that you've been exploring with some of the latest releases, we're always happy to jump in there too. So as we wrap up here on a final slide of our presentation, I have listed where we can be contacted. It's just an email address, being mepwebinars@trimble.com. And that is how you can get in touch with us if you have any questions on this topic, whether it be related to cake or any others. And also, as highlighted at the beginning of the session, the Trimble Community Webinar Portal is an excellent resource for you. If you're an active user in the platform, you already know the benefits you have there, but you have help articles, you have a variety of different specific in-depth webinar topics, you have use cases, you have the ability to chat with other users as well. So highly encourage you to get into the Trimble community if you're not already in there as well. So please feel free to use
So,
those resources or get back in touch as needed.
so it does give you the ability with Trimble Fab to
Mhm.
open up to actually export from Autobid sheet metal into the fabrication software and import everything that I just fabricated or just estimated. Now, some people ask me, they say, Kip, why would I bring in ductwork that hasn't been coordinated? Well, not every job needs coordinated. Not every job goes through a BIM process. But by bringing that information into Trimble Fabrication, I can bring in the estimate, the pipe or the duct and fittings into the Trimble Fab software. And I then just have to edit the fittings on the back end rather than manually input them over and over again. Right? I can do in minutes what would take somebody potentially hours. So at this point, right here is my project. And I'll come back over here. There's the project that I imported. All right. Let's go ahead and we're going to import a project. Maybe. Oh, let me import a file. There it is. Oop. Here. Nope. My import is turned off. So, my bad. Nothing's perfect in this world. So, with that being said, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, sometimes you're missing an ingredient when you're baking a cake and you have to
And you
improvise.
have to adjust, right? And in this instance, right, when I tested it the other day, it worked just fine, and today it didn't. So that's probably on me. Irregardless, when you think we're back to this, when you end up looking at these applications on the back end, and you look at the estimating software your application today, the great thing you want to be comfortable is that I'm getting the intended result that I hoped for, that I ended up with a cake on the left and not ending up with a cake on the right. Now, every estimator's ended up with a cake on the right, but it is our goal here at Trimble. And, so there's an amazing organization and team that I work with to ensure that you end up with a cake on the left, that you end up with the estimate that you intended to achieve. And with that being said, that's really all I have to offer. Caprice, do you have any last words?
No, not really beyond what you closed out with. Just thank you again if you've been tuning into the session. We, greatly enjoy providing tips and tricks on the software and just taking things higher level too, demonstrating what we can do when we have those streamlined processes, when we have a well-connected system, and when we're able to be confident with our processes, not individually, but also as a team. So I'd just like to add, again, if you have any questions on the topic today or have anything that you'd like to recommend for the future, just please feel free to email us at mepwebinars@trimble.com or take a look at the Trimble community. Like I mentioned, so many resources on there for your use. And if not, we hope to see you next time.
Once again, thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all. Bye-bye.